Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Second Son Woodworks. My name is Caleb, and today I'm going to be showing you how I built this 2x4 bar height table that can also be used as a workbench, made with casters and a butcher block top. Stay tuned. My number one goal in this project was to keep the cost of materials at a minimum, so I built the majority of this project out of 2x4s, except for the legs, which were made out of 4x4s, but you could use 2x4s if you just glue them together. All of the materials that are used for this project can be picked up at your local home improvement store, such as a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and the total cost for this project came in around $150, which is pretty great. Like I said before, this table can also be used as a workbench in your garage or your wood shop. These casters make it super handy for rolling around, and then also that bar height is great for a work surface that you can stand next to. If you like what you see, stick around and I'll show you how I did it. But before I get started, hit that subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. Alright guys, let's get started. The very first step in this project is to mill up all of the 2x4s that will be used for the tabletop. Now for this project I'm just using construction grade 2x4s, and I'm only using my planer to square everything up. Normally you would want to start with your joiner before you move on to the planer in order to get a fully squared up board. But since these boards will just be glued together, and I'll actually be squaring up these glued up sections, which you'll see later on in the project, I'm just using my planer. If you haven't seen the video of me creating this flip-top workbench that I'm using with my DeWalt planer and my DeWalt table saw, check it out right here. The link is above. Once I had completed planing all of the 2x4s that will be used for this project, I went ahead and prepped for the first clamp up. Now for this tabletop, I'll be doing 3 separate clamp ups so that I can run each of these 3 separate glue lam type beams through my planer. So this first one I'll be doing with 8 of the 2x4s. Pro tip, you definitely do not need this much glue. I got a bit crazy. After letting the first glue up dry overnight, I went ahead and prepped the planer to send it through. Make sure your planer blades are super sharp, as this is a pretty big surface to be sending through your planer, and make sure you just take off really small bits each pass. Once both of the faces had been completely smoothed down by the planer, I went ahead and took it over to my miter saw to square up the ends. And then after squaring up the ends, I took it over to my other workbench and I used some bar clamps to position it upright on its side so that I could square up the sides with my bench dog hand planer. I gotta say, this part of the process was pretty fun. Once I completed squaring up the side of this first beam, I went ahead and moved on to doing the second and the third beam the same exact way. And like I said before, each of these beams consist of 8 2x4s that I have planed down in my planer. And the reason that I just do 8 at a time is so that I can fit the whole piece through my planer. I have a 12.5-inch planer. If you have something that's bigger, then you could perhaps do bigger sections. But for this project and for my situation, I just did 3 separate ones, and that made the overall width of the tabletop around 36 inches. Once all 3 of these beams were thoroughly squared up, I went ahead and prepped for the big tabletop glue up. As I was prepping for the big tabletop glue up, I had to move these 3 different beams around in a number of different positions to figure out the best placement of the 3. And in addition, after I glued up the 3, I had to use my bench top hand planer to smooth out the top. Once I had figured out the best placement for these 3 beams, I went ahead and laid down a layer of glue for the glue up. Now once the glue up had completely dried, I went ahead and took off all of the clamps and did a little bit of hand planing to smooth out the top. Once I had finished hand planing that side of the tabletop, I went ahead and took out my straight edge and my circular saw to square up the ends. Now you'll notice that my circular saw blade is not big enough to cut through the entire tabletop, so I had to do one cut on one side and then flip it over and line everything back up to do the cut on the other side. Once the ends were squared up, I went ahead and moved on to hand planing the opposite face of the tabletop. At this point in the project, I went ahead and paused on working on the tabletop and moved on to working on the base of the table. And as I stated before, for this base I'm using 4x4s for the legs, and then for the cross section I am using 2x4s that I glued up. And as I said before, if you do want to just use 2x4s instead of these 4x4s, you can glue 2x4s up and that will work just fine. Right now I am cutting the sections of the legs down to their appropriate length, and then here in a second I will begin cutting the dados with my circular saw. There are many different ways that you could do dado cuts, such as with a table saw and a dado blade set, but in this situation I'm just going to be using my circular saw. And if you haven't done this before, the first step in using your circular saw for doing dado cuts is to set the blade to the correct depth, and then you just do multiple passes within the section that you want to do the dado cut, and then you can just finish it out with a chisel and a mallet. I also did a dado cut for the cross beam that will serve as a footrest if you're using this as a bar height table. I then used construction screws and a Forstner bit to attach the cross beam that is on the top of the base that will then be attached to the tabletop. After this, I went ahead and moved on to gluing up the base and then using some clamps to hold everything together for the correct dry time. I then did the exact same thing for the opposite side of the base. I then clamped up the two ends of the bases with the crossbeam and the dado cut. While the glue on the base was drying, I went ahead and moved on to getting started with the sanding process. Once the glue used for the base of the tabletop had just about cured, I flipped it over and used a Forstner bit and construction screws to attach it to the tabletop. I then moved on to attaching the casters to the legs. I then removed the clamps and moved on to the sanding process. And as always, I start with a really low grade paper such as 60 grit and then move up from there. It's interesting thinking about what originally got me into woodworking, and one of the biggest things that I enjoyed right off the bat was sanding, and I think part of it is because you get to see a lot of the character of the wood come out right in front of your eyes. It's kind of fun. Once I had finished sanding the entire table down with 120 grit sandpaper, I moved on to staining the table, and I'm using a dark walnut varathane stain for this project. Now, if you want to use this as a workbench, I'd recommend just using some oil to kind of seal it, the tabletop up. But if you're going to use this as a tabletop, you should pick a nice stain that you like, especially if you're just using construction grade lumber, and consider using a pre-finish stain as well. After letting the stain dry overnight, I went ahead and moved on to sanding the entire tabletop with 220 grit sandpaper. This preps the tabletop for the high gloss polyurethane finish that I'll be doing, as well as it just smooths out the blotchy parts of the stain. Once this was completed, I went ahead and moved the table outside and used a microfiber towel to clean off all of the dust and prep it for the spray finish. Since I'll be using my Wagner electric spray gun to apply this finish to the table, I used some mineral spirits to thin down the polyurethane for the first coat. If you have never used one of these HVLP spray guns to do a finish like this, you should give it a try. It really speeds things up, and you can do multiple coats really fast. The one thing that I'd recommend is do not use the same spray gun for doing paint, such as like a white paint that you use to do finishes like this. It's really hard to completely clean the gun of all of the white paint or paint that you use within it. So use different guns. Once the first coat of polyurethane had completely dried, I used a 320 grit sandpaper to sand the entire tabletop and the base, and then I moved on to doing a second and a third coat. Once I had finished applying the second and third coats of polyurethane to the tabletop and its base, the project was complete, and man, I gotta say I was really thrilled with how this project turned out. This table is super heavy and durable, and it'll be great for an outdoor table in my situation. If you're going to be doing this for a workbench, then good luck. If you're going to be using it as a tabletop bar height table, good luck. And thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate you tuning in to Second Son Woodworks. Please hit that subscribe button if you have not done that yet. Check my Instagram out and watch some of my other videos. And then also shoot me comments, messages if you have any recommendations for future projects, as well as just let me know what you think about this one. Alright guys, build something cool.